Welcome to Trail Tales. Thanks for being here, folks. I am going to reference my notes real quick so I don't forget anything. But thanks for coming to the November 2025 Trail Tales. I'm Haley Johnston. I'm the Executive Director of Alaska Trails. We're a trails nonprofit that works to build, maintain, and advocate for trails here in Alaska. If you've ever been on the Willowa Lakes Trail in Chugach State Park, or the Iditarod Trail in Girdwood, or a trail in Far North Bicentennial Park, or the Kasugi Ridge Access Trails up in Denali as of this summer, we may have had a hand in improving one of those trails. So that's who we are. We do these events in the wintertime. We're doing 6 of them this year, and every month, we partner with another nonprofit. So tonight our partner is Alaska Mountain Runners. So they will split the proceeds from the evening with us. So every ticket that's sold, every dollar that's donated, we split those with our partner. It's a nice way for us to kind of spread the trails love throughout the greater outdoor rec community. So thank you for joining us tonight, Alaska Mountain Runners. We also want to say a quick thank you to the Anchorage Museum. They're a great partner in this for hosting us every month. Before we get into some of the other housekeeping, I just want to say that we want to do a quick land acknowledgement. We recognize that we are here living and recreating, building and maintaining trails on the traditional and current homelands of the Dena'ina Athabascan people. And Alaska Native people have been the stewards of these lands for thousands of years, and we are psyched to show them our recognition and our appreciation for their stewardship, past, present, and future. The housekeeping, before we get into the fun stories, the bathrooms, if you need them, are located outside of the auditorium, down past the doors where you entered. In the event of an emergency, leave through the doors through which you entered. Please turn off your cell phones or silence them if you can. Tonight's event is being recorded, just what's happening up on stage. We don't normally do this, but I think because of the general enthusiasm for this great slate of storytellers, I had like 15 people call and email me in the last 2 days asking us if we were recording it, and so finally I was like, well, shit, I guess we should record it. So now we are. So this will be on YouTube afterwards. We'll send out a link and we'll post it on our social media and we'll share it with Alaska Mountain Runners. But so your stories are going to be recorded for posterity. We want to thank our volunteers out front too, Mike, Michelle, and Mark, longtime Alaska Trails volunteers. They're the folks who checked you in, made sure you had what you needed. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Matias, who is a man who wears a lot of hats and wrote himself a really short bio, which I feel like is not sufficient to describe all you do, but he's the event coordinator at the nonprofit Healthy Futures. He's the author of a book about the Equinox Marathon. He's the race director for Mount Marathon and Crow Pass Crossing. He is the president of the Alaska Mountain Runners. And his favorite places to run, hike, and ski are the hemlock forests, mountain ridges, and trails out his door in Bear Valley here in Anchorage. So without further ado, Matias, thank you for being here.
So now I can't see any of you, but I can see my notes. So, one thing not in my bio, but I hope this isn't too egregious of a stretching of the theme, which is mountain adventures tonight. But I have an Austrian mother, and I've spent a lot of time in Austria in my life. Fortunate enough to do that, and it's sort of where I developed a love for the mountains. And today, Austria proved they're not just alpine skiers, but they can play soccer too. For the first time in 28 years, they've qualified for the World Cup. So, bravo, Österreich. But actually, I'm here for Alaska Mountain Runners, as you know. Alaska Mountain Runners, you could say that's maybe a misnomer of a title. Anyone who's actually tried to run up a steep mountain knows that we're actually doing way more hiking than running. And even people, superhumans like David Norris, Mount Marathon record holder, even the steeps at Mount Marathon, he ends up hiking quite a bit. So maybe we should be called Alaska Mountain Runners hikers. something like that. But really, the sport, so Alaska Mountain Runners, we're dedicated to the development and promotion of mountain running. That's basically what we do. We've been around since 1999. We put on one main event. It's the Bird Ridge Hill Climb down in Indian. I think our race director, Julianne Dickerson, is in the house. So that's the one race that we actually direct. And then we also organize the Grand Prix, which is 9 events spanning from Hatcher Pass to Palmer to Anchorage to Indian to Seward to Juneau, and maybe even next year to Kodiak. So we organize this Grand Prix, a great variety of mountain running events, mountain running, hiking events. What else do we do? So we have a website. We have a pretty in-depth calendar of mountain and trail events and races throughout the state. A lot of people use that to sort of see what's going on and plan their calendar of what they'd like to do. We have on the website also, we have archive results going back. Some of our races, Mount Marathon's 98 years now, and Bird Ridge is 37 years, Matt Peak 40 years. So there's a long history of mountain running in this state. So we've archived all those results. So that's the racing side, but really we want to become more of a community organization. So to that end, we've started to advocate more for trail work and trail development, trail maintenance. So we've started partnering with Alaska Trails. We're going to be joining up with Chugach Park Fund and do a better job of giving back to the mountains and the community there. So that's, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. And then we've talked about doing some meetup outings, which will be just open to anyone who wants to go on sort of mountain tour. We're going to be doing free entries for those who have trouble affording an entry fee, so we're setting up a fund for that. And we're going to throw a season-ending party next year. We've sort of had this award ceremony, which we felt was getting a little too focused on the racing side and the 40 people who might be getting an award, but not of much interest to the mountain community at large. So we're going to organize to put on a season-ending party, maybe at Hilltop or Arctic Valley or Odd Man Rush, somewhere like that. So if you want to, and we'll have bands, and you don't even need to be a mountain runner, just come out and join the mountain folk and have a good time. So there's some of the things down the pike. And we are not a membership organization, but if you're looking for more information, we've got our website, as I mentioned, social media, and we're putting together an email listserv. So I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight and thank all our storytellers. You're in for a treat. The theme is mountain adventures, and there'll be running stories, hiking stories, running, hiking stories, ski stories, mountaineering, a little bit of everything. So enjoy the night. And you're not done with me yet. Okay, our first storyteller tonight is Jen Aschoff. Jen is an avid skier and climber with a passion for the Chugach Mountains. In 2022, she became the second woman and 10th person to complete the Chugach 120, with many of those peaks skied. It's fair to say she's obsessed with skiing. She's organized several big mountain Alaska expeditions, volunteers with the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, and enjoys mentoring women in the mountains. Jen lives in Eagle River with her husband Todd and their 2 crazy cattle dogs. If you spot a brightly dressed woman roaming the Chugach with skis in tow, snow or no snow, it's probably her. Jen's story is a Chugach ski adventure that celebrates our community of strong Alaska women. Please welcome Jen Aschoff.
Well, Well, thank you all for coming. I get 2 flowers since I have to go first, in case you were wondering. So this is always hard, putting yourself out there for your personal life. I'm accustomed to giving talks as a professional, but this is a little different, so bear with me. So as you know, in 2022, I finished this Chugach 120, and that is climbing all the 120 highest peaks in the Chugach Mountains. What you might not know is 48 of those summits were done with all-female crews. And that's a lot. So it is a lot. And I really like to celebrate all these amazing, strong Alaska women. It's a very unique community of women here, many of whom are in this room, many whom I don't recognize because you have recently showered. So this story is about climbing a 2-night trip where we climbed 4 peaks. I was with Kate Fitzgerald, which I'm sure many of you know as an amazing cross-country skier, very close to the Olympics. And in addition, Sophie Tidler, who has done the winter Front Range link up and has also finished the 120 peaks as well. And Chelsea Grimstad, who is an amazing mountain athlete and also is a veterinary practitioner out in the valley. So on this trip, it was early May, and I met my team at the Crow Pass trailhead, which is a winter setting, essentially. The road isn't plowed all the way up. So we met at the trailhead. It was very early. It was crisp. It was cold. I was half asleep. I was late like usual and full of apologies like usual. But anyway, we went and finished packing and then got ready to head up Goat Ridge. So a lot of people really loathe Goat Ridge, and I'm one of the ones that really likes to go up Goat Ridge. It's about 4,000 feet of vertical, and it can be pretty tricky and steep. It's a classic way to access the Eklutna Traverse. So we headed up through the icy skin track, through the alders, and then into the steep creek. And then with the snow being so hard-packed in early May, we ended up transitioning to crampons. We were carrying around 30 to 40 pounds of gear, including our ice axes, crampons, overnight gear, etc., because we're getting ready for a 2-night trip out there to get 4 different peaks. The goal was to climb and to ski Roost Peak, Golden Crown Peak, Sparrow Peak, and Ute Peak. Ute Peak is one of the big ones you see down in Girdwood. And Goat Ridge is a big, beautiful ridge you see from Alyeska, if you're familiar. So we made it up to Goat Ridge without a whole lot of drama, and then kind of pushed our way up to the top of Goat Ridge where it meets up with the Eagle Glacier. And this is where I just love that traverse, because you transition from crampons and you have all of the hard climbing behind you. You put your skis on and you have this long, glorious, lovely descent to the base of Roost Peak. And now it's a place that I've been many times, and I feel quite comfortable making that traverse, and I know exactly where to go. So we just sort of went across and just took in the scenery and just floated our way across the glacier, which is such a unique experience here in Alaska that most people don't get to have. So we make it to the bottom of Roost Peak, and we take out all our overnight gear and we cache it in the snow. Chelsea decides she wants to stay behind. She's not feeling super great. And so me and Sophie and Kate decided to go up Roost Peak. We went up a non-traditional way, which isn't too surprising if you know me. We went up the east side of Roost Peak, up a hidden couloir to a ridge that faces kind of south-southwest, and then made it to the summit. I typically carry very lightweight skis, and I did have lightweight skis. And this was a problem because that line was very steep and very icy. So we're standing on the top of the ridge looking down the couloir, and I'm not sure what the snow is like, but Sophie and Kate ski down ahead of me, and then there is essentially no doubt there is no soft snow anywhere in that couloir. and it's steep. So on one side, on the left, you have the rocky cliffs, and on the right side, you have the hanging glacier with several crevasses. And I have these very light skis that were not made for this kind of descent. But I went for it anyway. I kind of pressed that fear deep and jumped over the edge and started skiing down. Right about where Roost gets pretty steep is right next to that hanging glacier, and I skied into some shade where it was a little more difficult to see. And I smashed into a big chunk of ice that sent me careening. Now, for context, at the top, I always get ready for the descent, and I always plan for the worst and obviously hope for the best. So at the top, I locked my toe pieces, which made it so that my skis would not fall off. And I also attached my ice axe to my harness so that if I did fall and the ice axe was ripped out of my hand, it would catch my fall. I was glad I did that, because when I hit that ice chunk, I fell. And I would just like to remind folks that, our greatest glory, as they say, does not come from never falling, but it comes from rising every single time we fall. So I fell on this very steep section next to the hanging glacier, and I flipped in the air once and twice and picked up momentum. And then I was able to wrestle my ice axe into the snow, and it caught. And as expected, it ripped the ice axe out of my hand because I had so much momentum going down the slope. And luckily, that cord that I had attached my ice axe to my harness caught. And it caught hard, and it stopped me pretty suddenly going down the hill and knocked the wind out of me. So there I was in the middle of this slope, icy slope with a hanging glacier next to me, and I had just taken a little bit of a spill. So I picked myself up and kind of just gather my composure a little bit, take a deep breath. I still have a lot of steep skiing below me. And every time I made a jump turn, those skis were so light, they just chattered and vibrated violently. So it was quite difficult skiing, going down that thing with really light skis. So taking that first jump turn off of the steep slope that I was standing on after my fall was pretty tricky. But I got up the courage and I did that, and it feels like jumping into thin air sometimes. So I did that jump, and I landed the turn, and I continued to ski down. And I went a little bit slower at this time, and I also paid better attention to the texture of the snow, and didn't hit any more ice chunks, made it to the bottom where we met our friend Chelsea. So from there, we had 3 more peaks to do. And so our goal was to go over to Golden Crown and climb it, and then continue over to Sparrow and to UD Peak. So we decided to make camp before going up to Golden Crown because we ran into something unexpected. And since it's only a 7-minute talk, I can't talk about all the things that happened, but we decided to do that peak the following day. And on that one, we successfully summited it, but we weren't able to ski the whole thing because it was pretty rocky on top. And then the day after, so that night we stayed at Rosie's Roost and enjoyed a night out of the wind. And the day after, we kept going for it. We went and we climbed Sparrow Peak up this sort of west-facing ridge, and then we skied like a south-facing part of the face. It was hard getting to the top of Sparrow standing there with my skis poking over the edge of the cornice with a big steep drop below, and it is like jumping into thin air, that first turn going off the cornice when your skis are sticking over the edge, especially knowing how poorly my skis handled the day before. But I pulled it together, got myself up, and went for it. And I wasn't the prettiest run I've ever done, as Sophie will probably tell you, but I got down it safely and I skied it, and we just kept on going to the next peak. And we climbed up UD Peak, and Sophie and I decided not to ski the whole thing. We skied the lower couloir, but Kate Fitzgerald, sure enough, skied it pretty much from the summit, which is not too surprising for Kate if you know her at all. And then we went out Goat Ridge and made it to the car. And there was another Chugach adventure in the books and 4 more peaks to add to my list. And the takeaway point is we all fall, but it's important to just get back up every single time, no matter how hard the fall. And that's my story.
Thanks, Jen. I thought the takeaway was to carry heavier skis. No? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much. Our next storyteller tonight is Miles Knotek. Miles was born and raised in Moose Pass in the heart of the Kenai Peninsula. Ooh, little love for Moose Pass. I think Moose Pass is like I live in Girdwood, don't tell anyone what I'm about to say, but I think Moose Pass might be the best mountain town in Alaska because you have this like great access to all kinds of awesome mountain adventures there. And it's a little less bustly maybe than Girdwood can be sometimes. Anyway, a lot of Moose Pass love, that's great. Heart of the Kenai Peninsula, he was fortunate to have a family that values time in the outdoors and began exploring the surrounding mountains and trails before he could walk. He has a particular love for the Kenai Mountains and their many valleys, ridges, and summits. In this story, Miles is going to recount an adventure with fellow Kenai Peninsula kid, Joe Nyholm, on the Resurrection Pass High Route. Thank you.
I think there needs to be like a amendment to your claim of best mountain town if you like alders, I think, for life in Moose Pass. To me, a good adventure needs 3 things. It needs an intimidating goal, some sort of challenge or obstacle to overcome, and it needs a good partner. It was 2021, and usually my summers revolve around mountain races, things like Mount Marathon, Matt Peak, Crow Pass. But with COVID lingering, a lot of these events were in limbo. Every 4th of July since I was 12, I've done Mount Marathon, a race that I love deeply. But in 2021, it was bumped to July 7th, which meant that I had the whole holiday weekend to fill. Like Haley mentioned, I'm from Moose Pass. Love the Kenai deeply, particularly the area around Summit Lake. From family picnics and hikes, starting from when I was a baby to my first job at Summit Lake Lodge scooping ice cream, to learning how to backcountry ski by myself on Tenderfoot Ridge as a teenager. Accumulated a lot of experience in those hills. So I had the whole 4th of July week, and I knew I wanted to do something different. If you've been in Seward on the 4th of July, it's quite the scene. So I want to do something kind of the opposite of that, not the scene, very quiet and far away. So I'd kind of had this route picked out in the back of my mind that I was calling the Resurrection Pass High Route. I'm sure a lot of us here have done Resurrection Pass. It's beautiful, but you're only above tree line for a couple of miles. It's a lot of time in the woods, and I love the high country. I plotted a route following the western edge of the Resurrection River drainage, starting at Hope Point and following ridge lines all the way to Resurrection Pass proper, to then exit out Summit Creek, one of my all-time favorite places. Hope Point also has some personal significance to me. I worked on the trail crew that helped build the trail, the new trail up Hope Point back in 2016 or 15. So a lot of time sweating on that hill. So I've got my intimidating goals. I'm sort of challenged to overcome is this long traverse connecting Hope to Summit Creek. Next, I needed a partner. I immediately thought of my buddy Joe. Joe's also a Kenai kid. He grew up in Hope, and we met in high school in Seward. Something you should know about Joe and Miles' adventures is they usually have a flair for being harder than they should be. Whether that's racing Mount Marathon in a Gumby costume, or doing the Front Range link up backwards, or adding on 10 extra miles to rim on the Grand Canyon in search of soda. We kind of make things harder than they need to be. Take that as you will. Immediately, Joe was down for this adventure. The forecast was looking a little so-so, but we still decided, what's the worst can happen? Like, maybe it'll rain. So we left Joe's car at Summit Creek and drove to Hope and slept in the back of my car so we could get an early start. When Joe and I do these adventures, we like to do a fast and light style, so usually just running vests with just a whole bunch of candy. So that's pretty much it. Preferably Peachios is kind of the thing. So yeah, on this adventure we want to do the same thing. So just running vests, maybe like 4,000 calories in Peachios. I brought some pizza and some Snickers, I think was about it. And new on this trip, I was trying out something brand new to me, which was a $5 space blanket. Pretty high-tech stuff. So this night before, we're getting our packs all figured out, and this is where, if you ask Joe, our stories diverge. Joe insists that he asked me if I brought space blankets, plural, and I thought he said space blanket, singular, to which I responded yes. So one space blanket, Joe thought we had two. So the next morning, we start up the trail, and whenever we start these adventures, there's kind of this giddiness, like you don't really know what's going to happen, so we're kind of joking and having a good time hiking up the trail. We get out a tree line and quickly realize the cloud ceiling is just very, very low. Undeterred, we push on. We head up and over Hope Point and take a left and start heading south. We're going for a few hours, and at that time, I didn't have a watch that was capable of lasting that long. So Joe was our dedicated time and distance keeper, and I asked him, like, "Hey, Joe, how's our time?" He looks at me and goes, "Do you really want to know?" It had taken us about 2 hours to cover about 3.5 miles and 5,000 feet of climbing. So, ooh, shoot. So we did some mental math. Like, oh boy, we're out here for about 40 hours, I think. Undeterred, we push on and pretty much immediately make a wrong turn. We start descending a ridgeline, and something feels kind of off, so we pull out the phone, look at the map, and sure enough, we're going the opposite direction. Complete whiteout. Pull out the phone, get back on track, and away we go. If we continue like that for probably 8 or 9 hours, just kind of bumbling along in the fog, and then it starts to lift just a little bit. And it's just magnificent. It's the boundary between the Chugach National Forest and the Kenai Wildlife Refuge, so it's just really, really wild place. To our left is the Resurrection Creek Valley, and to our right stretches the Kenai Flats. And we quickly realize how wild this place is. We start finding caribou sheds. We start seeing bears. We start seeing goats. It's just a really wild, wild place for being so close to such a heavily trodden path. We keep going along, and we also realize this ridgeline is not really a ridge. It's either up or down all day long. And we soon resort to side hilling to avoid as much vert as possible. But if anybody hits side hills for a long time knows it's not the easiest on your ankles, particularly an ankle-breaking scree, which a lot of it was. We just kind of continue along, kind of in awe of the landscape. It's really beautiful, really wild. We had a young caribou follow us for a while. It was really curious. It was following us along for a while. I found a matching set of caribou sheds, and I've got them GPS pointed so I can go back for them one day. So the day continues, and we kind of reached this point where I had mapped out our last kind of easy bail point if things were not going good. Easy being a 2,000-foot bushwhack down to Resurrection Trail, and then a 15-mile walk back to the car. But neither of us really wanted to stop. We decided, we didn't really talk about it, but we just kept going. Took care of our feet, ate some Peachios, ate some pizza, and he said, let's just keep going. At this point, the clouds have come back, and the mood kind of goes back down again. We've been going for about 18 or 19 hours. At this point, just kind of steady hiking, up, down, and we're trying to get to this point called American Pass. And it kind of built this mythical status in my brain. American Pass on the 4th of July. It's like, yeah, like bald eagle, like machine guns, yeah, like American Pass. So that kind of became the joke. It's like, American Pass, hell yeah, brother. But the clouds just keep on getting worse and worse. We've got one more creek to go till we get to American Pass, and we kind of come down into this high drainage, and there's a very large sow brown bear and 2 very large cubs, just kind of Hummers, H3 Hummers out in the grass. So we kind of keep a low profile, don't really make much noise, and kind of give them a wide berth and make it around them. A couple hours later, we make it to American Pass, and from that point, it's about 20 hours in, and we're starting to feel a little knackered. The clouds are really low, and we knew we had kind of a complex exit out Abernathy Creek to get to Resurrection Pass Trail. It was that time we decided, let's try and sit out the clouds and see if we can see a little bit better in a few hours. Joe had brought kind of a tarp suspended between 2 trekking poles act as a little shelter. So we popped that up, ate some more candy, and kind of settled in for an hour or two. I started getting kind of shivery, so I pulled out my space blanket, wrapped it around myself, to which Joe says, "Oh, can I have one too?" Like, "Oh, sorry, Joe, about that. This is the only one I got." I said, "Oh, okay." So we decided to sleep. I'm curled up in my space blanket. Joe's right next to me, and I can start to feel Joe shiver. We're pretty wet. It's just kind of damp, and you're just in a cloud all day, and we're laying in the tundra, so we're just damp and cold, and the mosquitoes start coming. So we decide to collapse Joe's tarp, and we burrito ourselves in it, but then it traps the condensation, and so we're even wetter, and I can feel Joe shivering even more. And so I ask him, "Hey, Joe, do you want some of the space blanket?" And he goes, "Yes, please." So we're wrapped in the space blanket, and it's not very big, so the most efficient way to share it is to spoon. So we're spooning in the space blanket, nice and wet and cold. It's maybe 3 or 4 hours now, and we peek out of our burrito, and the clouds are still low, but we're getting pretty cold. So let's screw it. Let's get the heck out of here. We stand up, and Joe spins around and takes a picture of me, which I used as my kind of profile picture for this event. And I kind of have the space blanket kind of as a poncho around me, and I look kind of like wide-eyed, and the fog is swirling. And yeah, it was a very funny moment. But it was 4th of July. It was about 2 in the morning on the 4th of July. I was like, yeah, it's 4th of July. Happy 4th of July, man, at American Pass. So we decided to keep going, and we cross up and over into Abernathy Creek and start to descend, and it just quickly turns into a swamp. Really thick alders, really thick willows, and just shin-deep muck. We think of those 3 bears behind us, and then quickly just decide to beeline for the high country again. We traverse ridgelines, and finally the clouds start to lift just as we make it down to Resurrection Pass. I took this selfie with the Resurrection Pass sign of Joe and I, and Joe's standing behind me, and we both have these like really deep lines in our faces, and we both have really tired eyes, and yeah, it's a great picture. And we cross up and over Harry's Pass into East Creek, up and over the East Creek Saddle down to Summit Creek, which is one of my all-time favorite places in the world, and finish the traverse. All in all, ended up being about 39 miles, 30 hours, and 23,000 feet of vert. Yeah, it was a good one. Made it back to Hope, got some burgers, and then I fell asleep in a parking lot on the Hope Highway. This year, Joe and I had written up another idea for Ridge Traverse, which we were calling the Y to Y, starting at the Hope Y and ending at the Moose Pass Y, which is where I grew up. This spring, Joe was in a pretty serious accident and has been on the long road to recovery. So we have not been able to do the Y to Y yet. But yeah, now more than ever has made me realize the importance of having these big adventures to look back on and think about the good times, and then also to have an adventure to look forward to, and yeah, have something to dream about, and dream about shivering under a space blanket eating Peachios. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles, for that story. That was awesome. And Joe Nyholm is going to be joining you on these adventures sooner than later. Joe's on the marathon race committee as well. So, and I can attest that Miles did indeed do trail work at the Res Pass Trail, because one year I was running the Res 50 miler, and I was about 42 miles in and suffering pretty hard. And there's Miles cheering us on at the edge of the trail, and I half expected him to just drop his tools and run in with me, which I would have welcomed the company at that point. But next time, huh, Miles? Okay, next speaker is Patty Foldager. Patty Foldager is happily retired with her husband Flip in Hope, Alaska. She's been running in Alaska since 1980 and has completed 42 Mount Marathon races. That's a record she shares, a women's record she shares with Ellen Brown. At the first four of these, men and women raced together. Then in 1985, women received their own race, and Patty emerged victorious of the first all-women's Mount Marathon. Her story is about the ups and downs of that first all-women's Mount Marathon race. Please welcome Patty.
Once upon a time, in a small town in Alaska, in 1950, some men got together and they raced from downtown to the top of a mountain and back down. The whole idea was to get there in under an hour. They weren't successful at first, I don't think, but they continued to try. 48 years later, in 1963, the women's joined them to do the same task. Once more, they were trying to break an hour. It took 22 years in 1985 before they finally, after a whole lot of debate, they had an all-women's race. And so this is my story. To begin with, I'm not a promoter of myself. I let my husband Flip do that for me. In 1984, I had my son, and 3 months later, my son Trent, and 3 months later, I ran the Mount Marathon race with not a very super respectful time. So I came into the Mount Marathon in 1985, pretty much under the radar. That year when I realized that there was going to be an all-women's race, I decided that I would love to win that race. Well, of course, that took a lot, and so I trained with Fred Moore and my husband Flip, and we did our homework. We ran up the mountain as much as possible. We tried all the trails, we timed everything. And I came into the race mainly thinking that I wanted to break an hour, which at that time only 7 women had previously done that. A couple of them had done it a couple of times. And so I wanted to be part of that elite field. So that was my story with that. So race morning, I remember going to the starting line, and as I got closer to 4th Avenue, all I could hear was all this noise. So this is the first time all the women had gotten together to run a race. And I come around the corner on 4th Avenue, and the streets were packed with people, and they were screaming and they were yelling for us women. And it was amazing because we had never gotten that recognition before. I went to the starting line. I was feeling pretty confident. I had looked at the list of women that were going to run, and I figured, well, I think maybe I could do this. I think I could win this race. That would be cool to win the all-women's race. So I'm standing there feeling kind of confident and looking around at the rest of the girls. There was 56 of us, and we were all getting ready, and I thought, well, okay, here we go. They started doing the countdown, and all of a sudden, up over the hill comes Lynn Spencer-Galanis. Now, I don't know if anybody knows Lynn Spencer-Galanis, but she is an amazing athlete, and at that time, she was the record holder in 53:19, which she had done running against the guys. And she did that, I think she did that in 83, and I think overall she placed 8th place or 9th place for that race against the guys, which totally was amazing. My heart fell. Here I had thought I was going to win the race. It was going to be so cool, so easy, and there's Lynn. So I was like, oh well, I'm not going to win the race. At least I'm going to break an hour. So my husband was standing there, and he's like, hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the win. Just run your own race. So I said, okay. So before I knew it, we ran up the street. The gun goes off. And I don't know why anybody runs so fast up that damn street. But I mean, it was ridiculous. We sprinted to the mountain. We got to the base of the mountain, and it was really weird for us women because in the past, when we got to the base of the mountain, we got to stop because we were running with all those guys. I mean, first time I ran, there was 188 guys, and there was only 20 women. So you get to the base of the mountain, 20 women with all 188 guys, you stop and you rest. There was no resting. We got to the mountain after sprinting up like stallions, got to the mountain, everybody's out of breath. Of course, Lynn, she's taken off in front of us. okay, let's go. So we followed her up the cliff of the mountain. I remember Fred Moore yelling to me, run your own race, run your own race. And I'm like, oh my God, I just want to get up the cliff. Yeah. So we get up the cliff, and it was really cool because some of the guys, which they still do to this day, were at the top of the mountain. These are the guys that are running the mountain later on after us women. They were standing up there, they were cheering for us girls. And it was really cool because we could look around. For the first time, we could actually see the other women. I mean, previously, we never could. I mean, first time I ran the race, I didn't even see a woman. But so we started going up, and I remember it was pretty cool because all the girls were around us, and we're all working together. And of course, we're all trying to follow Lynn. And she's totally in front of us. And so back then, I have to say that we didn't groom the trails. It was an obstacle course. It was wet, there was grass, there was trees. If a tree fell down, we were crawling over it or under it. I mean, there was no grooming going on back then. And as everybody knows, it rains a lot in Seward, so it's usually muddy and sloppy. Well, that morning it had gotten sunnier, so it was a little bit better, but it was hard. And I remember thinking, for some reason, that without the guys, it was actually going to be an easier race. But it wasn't. It was pretty hard. And so in my mind, I just wanted to break an hour. And my practice times told me that I could. So I was like, okay, just stay with Lynn. Man, you're not going to run 53 minutes. I mean, she's going to run 53 minutes, at least if you stay with her. Well, Lynn was in front of us. We were following her, and she kind of slowly got away. And I started watching her. And I mean, she was playing cat and mouse with me. I swear she would run around and when she knew I could see her, and then she'd slowly walk. And I was like, oh, so then my adrenaline's just getting at me, And by the time I got to halfway, I was like, I could see her, and, I could see the rest of the girls around me and stuff. And got to halfway, and if anybody's ever run Mountain Marathon, once you get to halfway, it's almost like a second race. You can feel the wind, the breeze. It just gives you a little second breath of air to just keep going. So I put my head down and I kept going. And before I know it, I'm following my path up, and Lynn's kind of going back and forth. And before I know it, we're crossing, and I'm ahead of her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Well, I didn't know, but later on I found out that Lynn actually hadn't even trained for the race. She just naturally is a good runner, athlete, and her brother Billy had talked her into running the race because it was a historical race, and he wanted her to be part of that. And so she had just jumped into the race, and here she is kicking our butts, basically. So I passed her, and once I passed her, that was another fear. All of a sudden, as a woman, I'm looking up ahead, and there was nobody to follow. There was no guys in front of us. And that's different. That's just crazy to be up there. And I'm thinking, oh my God, why did I pass her? I should have just followed her to the top. What the heck am I doing? But I remember Flip, and I remember Fred telling me, just run your own race. So I put my head down and just pretended I was in practice, and I just got to the top of the mountain. Once I got to the mountain, I looked back, and I seen all these amazing women. I mean, the whole ridge is just full of women, not guys, women. Nothing against the guys, but anyway, so all of these powerful women, and a new fear set in, because in the past, when we came up around the mountain and we came back down, here you are in the middle of the pack of a bunch of guys, and if you can imagine, a girl's running down the hill with 50 to 75 guys screaming down behind you, and you're 110 pounds, and they're 150 pounds, and that was just a nightmare in itself. And I was like, wow, this is going to be cool. I don't have that behind me. I can actually run down the mountain without all these men throwing rocks at me and stuff. And then I look over at the ridge and I see all these women, and I realize that most of these women are cross-country skiers, not just cross-country skiers, they're cross-country Olympic-type skiers. And I'm like, man, these girls are going to fly on the down. Well, I had trained coming down a lot, and I knew I could run under 9 minutes coming down that mountain. And I just was like, okay, you can do it. You got to stay ahead of these skier girls. They're going to clean your clocks. So I ran as hard as I could, and I danced down the mountain. I just tried to run as light as I could and as fast as I could, and I got to the gully. And the gully is really rough and rocky, and I followed the lines right straight down where I'd practiced before. And the whole time, I just had this fear that these women were going to eat my clock. I mean, I just knew they were going to mow me down, and I ran in fear. And I got to the base of the mountain right before we come out, and once again, all the guys are standing there. I had went from over here, and then they came back over to cheer us on again, and that was so cool to have them there. And I got that last breath of air that energized from them. Came out around the cliff. Before I came down, I stopped, and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta finish now. And I looked behind me because I expected Lynn to be right there. And at that time, I didn't see Lynn or hear her. And as soon as I came around the corner, it was a monumental moment because the screaming and the yelling was amazing. Everybody was screaming, and it was like, wow, for the first time, they're screaming for women. I mean, the women could hear it. So I ran down the street, and I came around the corner, and there was a cop car standing there by the hospital. And every now and then, they'd kind of beep their siren, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder what happened. And I mean, nobody tells you this stuff, right? And I was like, what are they doing? So as soon as I got closer to them, then the cop car started moving ahead of me, and I'm running behind it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is for me. And so I'm running along, and all I could smell was that darn cop car's exhaust. And so I'm running to one side and running to the other side, trying to get away from it. I was like, I'm going to pass out before I even get to the finish line. And people are going to run past me. And I mean, it was a new fear. So anyways, by the time I got down to the bank and I finished the race, and the screaming and the yelling was just amazing. And one of the things that I forgot to say was that they always wanted to have the women's race before the men's race. And they said that first year that they had to have the women's race because they were afraid that if the women went after the guys, that not enough people would stay to watch the women run. And I think when we came down and all those people at the beginning and then at the end of the race, we seen all those people screaming and yelling. That was pretty spectacular. People did want to see the women run. So I got to the finish line. I got to watch the rest of the girls run the race, finish the race. And at that point, I had tears in my eyes. And I didn't have tears in my eyes because I won the race. I didn't have tears in my eyes because I did break an hour for that run. But I had tears in my eyes because I knew from that moment that the Mount Marathon, all women's race, was there forever. 40 years. So.
Our first storyteller here after intermission is Wiley Bland, a lifelong Alaskan. Wiley enjoys mountain adventures, spending time with friends and family on trails. Wiley can be found coaching cross-country running, skiing, and track. He has served on the Alaska Mountain Runners Board, the Tom Besh Memorial Scholarship Committee, and recently retired, congratulations, after teaching for 30 years in Anchorage School District. Wiley and his wife Brandy inspire their children Casey and Leah to spend time outside on trails and give back to their community. Wiley's story is about his memories of Bob Spur, who is the namesake for Alaska Mountain Runners' most inspirational award. Thanks, Wiley.
Well, thanks, Haley, and thanks everyone for showing up tonight to support Trail Tales and the Alaska Mountain Runners. Before the event started tonight, Art Davidson, the legend, came up to me and he started sharing a Bob Spur story. And that's kind of what this event is about tonight, is community and sharing those stories. And I want to start tonight by talking about pictures and photographs. When I came in here, I was looking at those pictures that Roman Dial had on the wall. And really, pictures and photographs, whether they're at home, at work, or on our desk, bring back good memories of friends, family, and adventures. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, is a picture of an old friend of mine that I took 30 years ago. And his name is Bob Spur. And I'm going to tell you why. This story begins in the fall of 1994 on Arctic Valley Road at the base. And some of you out there in the audience remember we used to get together on the weekends and just run, well, actually it was more like a death march slog, up to the top and then run down. And that's what we did. That was our thing through the fall. And I noticed on some of these runs that this other guy was starting to show up. Wiry build, probably 140 pounds dripping wet, pretty quiet, kept to himself. And come to find out, the guy was twice our age. He was 58 years old. And I'm 59 now. I can't imagine. Driving up that road gets me tired. So I got curious, and I wanted to know what made this guy tick. So I went up to him and introduced myself. Come to find out his name was Bob Spur. And when you meet Bob for the first time, he's just got these intense blue eyes. And there was something about him, and I knew it was almost like, and I knew his climbing resume, and I knew about his background in the mountains. So it was kind of like this older, wiser Obi-Wan Kenobi type fellow, and I'm the young Luke Skywalker. I knew that this was a guy I wanted to spend time with and just learn more in the mountains. And so began this friendship, but really was a mentorship into climbing, hiking. So in the fall we would climb a lot in the Front Range, and then in the wintertime we do the same thing, whether it was snowshoeing up Kanoya Peak or snowshoeing up Ptarmigan Peak or scrambling up mountains. And then in the spring we would do different loops and hike and climb, and it's just this great year of life that I had with him. There are three things that come to mind when I think of Bob. One is, everybody talks about traveling light. Well, back then, 30 years ago, it was Bob Spur light. He had on these really, what I thought were cool leather hiking boots. He had his wooden ice axe, and then he had that pack, which it was always incredible how light he went. It was just basically hat, coat, gloves, water bottle to stay hydrated, that Leafa hat, and his glacier glasses, of course. He was always ready. So it reminded me about basic needs in the mountains and needs and wants and traveling light, because I would show up with just, might have been just a bag of rocks. I'd have my Freedom of the Hills book and this big oversized pack and everything from REI and AMH. So I started to learn slowly to travel lightly. And that was one thing that really stuck out about him. The other thing was that Bob wasn't a man of words. He was more about action. So he was impeccable with what he had to say, whether it was a redirect, tell me where to go, or route finding. But he was really wise about direction. He was a super wicked smart guy. He was a physicist by nature, taught at AMU, and why he took me on as like a young guy, I don't know. He let me follow in his trails. And the third thing that really stands about him, and I love this, was time. Bob was precise like a Swiss watch. So when it was an 8 a.m. start time for Bob, that meant 7:45. Sometimes as early as 7:30. He was just on the clock, wanting to be there on time. So on all these hikes and climbs we did, I noticed he was always messing with his watch. And finally, we did this, in the springtime, we did this big loop around Rainbow. I want to say it was like 8 or 9 hours. And every time I'd sit down, he'd start messing with his watch. So finally, on that Rainbow hike, I looked up at him, I said, Bob, why are you always messing with your watch? And he looks at me and he says, well, there's rest time and there's run time. And you're on rest time. And that got me to think, I think he just called me, like, is he checking me for being a loafer and sitting on my butt? But that's okay. But in all seriousness, the guy was like precision, purpose, everything meant something. He logged everything. Everything was purposeful with what he did. And it carried through into my own life about making sure you made the best use of your time. And then there was August the 11th, 1995, North Maroon Peak and the Maroon Bells in Colorado. We were both training for the Pikes Peak Marathon. Of course, Bob was a multiple age group winner and the Ascent, and I was training for my first Pikes Peak Marathon. And on that day, it was beautiful blue skies. We had the bare essentials. We had light packs. Bob was route finding. He was the Obi-Wan, checking out the trails, making sure everything was good. Weather was good. And, of course, the time. He was efficient. We were trying to, especially in Colorado peaks, you want to finish up by noon or 1 o'clock because of storms. So on the summit, when we were there, of course, I was sitting down snapping pictures. Bob was all about efficiency. He wasn't really about showmanship. But he was in that moment where he had his hands on his hips. He was looking out. He looked like a Roman gladiator. And I took a picture of him. And it happened to be the last picture of Bob. Shortly after that, we began our descent, and I could just hear this whoosh, this slip. And when I looked out behind me, I could just see his body going over. Thankfully, there was a rock band in front, and I couldn't see beyond that. And your first thought in those situations is, well, you got to get down, you got to save your buddy. But then it was an exposed rock. That wasn't a go. But I did get down to get help. And 2 weeks after that, after the tragedy, there was a group of us again that met on Arctic Valley Road at the base. And this time it was a cold, wet, rainy day, and some of you guys were actually there on that run. It was more of a celebration. This time it wasn't a slog or a death march. I mean, people seemed like they were more upright, ran with purpose, and we honored Bob with a run up Arctic Valley Road to the chalet where there were more stories told about this great guy. So I go back to the picture and purpose. You know, I keep the picture on my desk at home. Sometimes it's just a reflection. I mean, I'm not running up Arctic Valley anymore. I'm not doing the big mountains. But it inspires me to get outside and do something just like he would have done. He lived with a lot of purpose. He had meaning in his life. And that's, I guess, the message that all of us can take away from that is, you know, live each day like it's your last and do the best you can with the days you have here. There's a great movie, Shawshank Redemption. There's that scene toward the end where Andy and Red are sitting in the prison yard, and Andy's telling Red, you know, how he's gonna get out and all this, and Red's saying, "You're crazy. You're not gonna be able to do that." And Andy looks back at him and says, "Well, you got a choice. You can get busy living or get busy dying." And Bob really was inspirational. He was living up to that last moment the way he would have wanted all of us to live, just to get out there, get on our trails, and live life with purpose. And I still do that today. It's just making sure we get out there and take care of ourselves, and then have somebody accountable that we can look to, like a mentor or a buddy who can keep us going and ticking along in the mountains. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Wiley, for bringing Bob Spur back to life tonight. Those of us that came later, we wished we had been able to meet him and hear his stories too. So it was great that we could hear that story tonight. The next speaker is a veteran of the women's Mount Marathon race as well. But before I introduce her, I just want to mention a couple things about going back to Patty's story. So. Really how unique it is that the Mount Marathon race has an all-women's race. It's maybe a handful of races in the country. I mean, things like the Olympic marathon trials has an all-women's race. But citizen races, you just don't see that. The women are lumped in with the men. The juniors are often lumped in with everyone else. And it took a while for Mount Marathon to get there. You could argue it should have happened earlier, but in 1985 it finally did happen. And that aspect of the race has never gone away. So now we have 375 men, 375 women, 300 juniors, and they all get the due that they deserve with their own events. And it did start out, the women's race, where the women went first, the men went second, and that inequity was pointed out after doing that for too long, that maybe the women should get the quote-unquote prime billing and get the late afternoon larger crowd race to go second. And so, I don't know, about 10 years ago now, we alternated. The men go first one year, the women go second, and then we switch it up the next year. And actually, the guys actually like that, you know. They're happy to give up the mid-afternoon race every other year and get their race done and not have the nerves for half the day and go up and party and cheer the women on. So it's a necessary adjustment and sort of win-win for everyone. So for the next storyteller. Claire Connelly. She grew up in Ireland. Claire grew up in Ireland and moved to Alaska 30 years ago. She works at Skinny Raven Sports and as a vet assistant at a large animal hospital in Palmer. Claire is passionate about animals and running in the mountains around Eagle River and Chugiak, where she raised 6 children, including 3 talented mountain runners, or mountain runner hikers. Claire's story is about how their beautiful pit bull, Bronwyn, saved family members from a bear attack in 2017. Claire Connelly.
Sorry, I'm very nervous, so I'm just going to maybe keep my eyes closed while I tell this story. But it was 2017. I have the date tattooed here on my arm. Sorry. It was just a regular morning. My daughter Annie got me up in the morning to see if I would run with her up the mountain. And Bear Mountain is right behind our house in Chugiak, and we run it all the time. It's a daily, not every day, but we run it 4 or 5 times a week. And anyway, I got up. It was early. We got Bronwyn, headed up the mountain. Everything was fine. It was a beautiful morning. And got up to the top, went on a little bit on the ridge back there. It was so beautiful that day. We have pictures of Bronwyn and me and Annie up there. And came back down. We were very quiet, did everything wrong. We didn't make any noise. We had no bear spray. We were just out there, living having our day. And we're coming down. We're about 3/4 of the way down, and I stopped. There was a grizzly bear, right in front of me. And I saw one cub, and I immediately said to Annie, dial 911, because, it's just that split second, and you think, oh my God, like time just stopped. It just stops. You just don't know, you just can't even think properly. But I did have the awareness to say, hey, dial 911, because I thought there's going to be a body recovery or we're going to need help, because I saw the cub. And immediately the bear was about 15 feet in front of us, and she just kind of swung around and started coming right at us. Annie was like, because we're obviously on a mountain, so Annie's just slightly elevated above me. And anyway, Bronwyn was down. The trail kind of goes off. There was a little divot down there, and so she just went straight for the bear. Now the bear, it's a grizzly. It's a big bear, We all know how big bears are. So anyway, so we immediately just. So I was very calm when I said to Annie, dial 911. And immediately, as soon as Bronwyn went and distracted the bear, got after the bear, we turned around and we went back up the mountain. We just started going up, and I immediately went from so calm to a banshee I was just crazy, because I was just leaving my dog. So she was being attacked by the bear, and logic says, I can't go down and fight a bear with it was 2 cubs, because Annie saw 2, I saw 1. But my emotions were it was just crazy. I was just screaming the whole way up. Annie's on the phone with 911. I was just a complete lunatic. Screaming for Bronwyn, screaming how I was saying the stupidest things like, I hate Alaska, I hate mountains, which I don't. I don't. But I just was in Ireland we don't have bears, So anyway, we're going back up the mountain. I'm screaming the whole time. Annie was 18 at the time, and she's so calm. She's so collected. She has it together. Meanwhile, I'm the mom, and I'm just useless. I'm just thinking of my dog that I just left behind. And anyway, we'll go back up the mountain, and Annie's still on the phone with 911, so I called my friend Noreen, her husband's a fireman, and I just called her, I said, hey, will someone come and help us, you know? And she had no answer. The answer afterwards was no, she told me later. But which is fair, you know, they can't expect the people, you know, 911 to come out every time. But anyway, so then I called my friend Ingrid, who lives at the base of Bear Mountain, and I said, where's Eric, her husband? You know, he's a hunter, he'd have gone. And then my phone died. So now Ingrid thinks that I'm dead or something, you know. So anyway, we go up the mountain. There's a lot of other stuff happened in between, but I have 7 minutes. So we go back up, and Bear Mountain, if you've ever been on it, you're in the trees, in the brush, and then you go up, and there's a clearing up there. So we're just kind of sitting up there. Annie was, I think she'd hung up with 911 at that stage. And we're just kind of sitting there trying to decide, do we go all the ways up and over and around the ridge, or do we just kind of hang out here and see what happens? Annie had, in the meantime, told me, she said, Mom, stop calling Bronwyn's name, because she might, you know, she's hurt, she could be hurt or whatever, and she might try to come up and she is probably injured or something, so I had stopped calling her name. And then after about 40 minutes, we were just sitting there, trying to decide what to do. And Bronwyn, and he's like, Mom, there's Bronwyn. And so she's coming up the mountain. It was like that movie, I can never remember, Homeward Bound, yes. So it was like the Homeward Bound movie. The dog is coming up, and she's limping, and so we immediately jumped up. I'm looking like, is there a bear? You know, like, is the bear just sitting there waiting for us? You know, which is kind of dumb, but your mind does crazy things. So we ran down. She was bleeding, and I wasn't sure if she was bleeding internally. The outward bleeding wasn't too bad, but she was still bleeding, and I didn't know what injuries she had internally, if any. So I picked her up. And she weighed about 65 pounds, so we kind of tag teamed. I would walk with Bronwyn, and Annie would go in front of me, and then I would hand her off to Annie, and then I would go around. And so we did that for a while, and we're coming down the mountain, and 911 did show up. So we're almost at the bottom of the mountain, and, you know, we're struggling now. We have to get her to the vet. And the police were there, and they were great. They were really good, but we were kind of in a hurry now. So we just kind of needed to the bear's gone. Oh, so I got to backtrack a little bit. On the way down, we were making noise, obviously, then, because we didn't know if the bear was still there. So we were picking up stones and just throwing them ahead of us. And Bronwyn's tail was wagging the whole time, because, you know, she wants to go get the stones. So that was a good sign. So that was, you know, because we were just thinking the bear was still sitting there. Logic says the bear's gone. But at the same time, we were just so nervous. Anyway, so we get down, the police are there, they're trying to help us, but we're like, hey, we got a dog to get to the vet. And my friend Ingrid and Noreen and Jennifer were all at the bottom of the mountain because they didn't know what was going on, as my phone died. And Ingrid had called the vet and said, hey, there's a dog coming in that was, you know, attacked by a bear. And kind of at the time, I didn't realize the magnitude of what Bronwyn had done till, you know, we got her to the vet, sat down, and then everything starts to sink in. I'm forgetting stuff now. I have notes, and I don't want to pull them out. Anyway, so she healed perfectly. She had to have a surgery. It was like a 2.5-hour surgery, and they put a drain in her, and we got pictures of her with her. So she did survive. And she lived out her life for another 6 years. And she died on the 4th of May, 2023. And we still miss her a lot. Sorry. Anyway, so I think that's my story. The one other thing I would say is that weekend, it was June 2017, and it was on a Thursday. And the following Sunday at Bird Ridge, Jack Cooper was killed by a bear. And the next day, Erin Johnson was killed up at Pogo Mine, and her parents are friends of mine. And so we were very lucky to have Bronwyn with us that day, because I know if she wasn't with us that day, I would not be here, and neither would my daughter Annie. If we were here, we probably would be mutilated in some way. It wasn't the bear's fault, it was our fault. Anyway, that's my story. So to take from this is, dogs are the greatest.
We're gonna move to our next storyteller. We've got Raven Johnson here tonight. Raven resides in Seward, is a clinical social worker, psychologist, parent, and prolific mountain athlete, known primarily for their climbing first ascents and steep skiing first descents in many ranges around the world, from Alaska to Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, and China. Strap in for Raven's story as they share the details of accomplishing the first winter ascent and descent of Mount Alice's western aspect. Here we go.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Raven. I'm non-binary and relationally kind of queer as well. I live in Seward. I run a clinical practice there called Behind the Sun Therapeutics that we do outpatient stuff, but also work with athletes and first responders and stuff like that. And the story I want to share with you is about the first descent of the west face of Mount Alice, which is a very prominent peak across Resurrection Bay from downtown Seward. Just to give you a little bit of backstory, the way I got very excited about steep skiing was, for the longest time I was very highly invested in climbing, and then in 2018 my best friend and primary mountain partner, Ryan Johnson, died in the Mendenhall Towers after completing the first ascent of the north face of the main tower with Marc-Andre Leclerc, and there's a Netflix documentary that talks about the life of Marc-Andre Leclerc if you want to check that out. But as a result, I really started to fall out of love with alpinism, which had been kind of like my primary guidepost for my life. It kept me healthy, kept me training, kept me involved, gave me a purpose. I had dreams and goals that I could apply myself towards. And all of a sudden, my love for alpinism was gone, and I would go out in the mountains and I would feel what we call in psychology world anhedonia, where I'm feeling a severe lack of joy or pleasure in the things that normally bring me joy. And so I was worried that I was going to lose my relationship with the mountains as well as having lost my best friend. And so that's how I started to find steep skiing. I was looking for an alternative way to play in the mountains that was fulfilling and would allow me to use all of the skills that I had built over the years. And so, and a couple of mentors. I've had three very important Ryans in my life. Ryan Hokinson was my kind of ski alpinism mentor for some years. Ryan Johnson, the fellow who I just talked about, that passed away. And then now Ryan Sims is kind of my main climbing and steep skiing partner. And he lives in Valdez with his wife Lydia and their little babies. But Mount Alice is a gorgeous mountain. It stands about 5,300 feet above the ocean, and there's this it's got this cathedral-like sort of ambiance. It's a very impressive mountain. The western aspect is about a 2,500 foot sort of triangular head wall. It's essentially like a slab big wall with a lot of these overhanging kind of rock eyebrow features that split it up. And after getting into steep skiing, kind of starting in 2016, I started hearing these rumors from my friends who just sort of had imagined the possibility that they might be able to find a line that you could ski through on this west aspect of Alice. And after years of recreating the area and seeing the face from all kinds of different perspectives, I began to start to develop more of an eye for this type of line. And along the way, between say 2016 and the story I'm sharing with you, which is in spring of 2022, I participated in a lot of kind of formative technical skiing, including descent of the northwest face of Bashful Peak, which was a route climbed by Art Davidson and Hisasuma Nakamura in 1965, and also a kind of the Peters Creek trifecta, which was a descent of the Shroud on Bellicose, the Malignant Couloir on Mount Benign, and the Northwest Couloir of Rumble, which are all sort of like kind of classic Chugach test pieces. But yeah, come spring of 2022, I'd been really putting in a lot of hours on my skis around town, and it had been really stormy. Like, it was very intensely snowy. The kind of winter where you have to plow. Like, you plow, and then you leave for work, and then you come home at lunch, and then you plow, and then you go to work, and then you come home from work, and then you plow again, and that kind of thing. And so the land was just getting continually refreshed, and so just we're biding our time, skiing in the trees, and had all these big plans for spring that fell through due to flight options not working out to these like grander ranges. And so I just started like kind of choosing to invest locally. And on one big storm day, I went kind of skinning up into the bowl beneath the west face of Alice to basically kind of see what the storms had been doing to it. And there was just enough clearing kind of at the finish of this storm cycle to get the binoculars up there. I rode my sled from the house and skinned for several hours up into the top of this bowl, and all of a sudden I'm standing below this 2,500 foot kind of like west facing slab big wall that's covered with snow, and the snow looked soft, and it looked thick, and it looked consistent, the kind of thing that you look for when you want to try something sort of crazy. You want this consistent, sort of dense coastal powder that really sticks to steep cliffs and escarpments and that kind of thing. And so I called all my friends, and I called my closest friends, and we put together a plan. I sent a bunch of imagery and that kind of thing, and everybody felt hopeful enough at least to like agree to meet in the morning and try and head up to the base of it. So we followed my tracks from the day before and went up to the base of the west face and access the bottom of our line, which essentially there's just kind of like these big cliffs that are broken up by a series of very steep snowfields and little guts and stuff like that. And so we started booting up the face and quickly got steeper and steeper. We arrived at this like snow arete or ridge in the middle of the face, and then there's sort of this rock head wall. And from the base, we'd seen sort of three options. There's this steep sort of snow arete off to climbers left, and then there's a direct sort of chimney through this little rock head wall, and then there's these series of patchy snowfields off to the right that look like they have the possibility at least of being able to like bypass. So we're booting up there. We've all got our crampons and billy goat plates and tools and whippets out, and we're just putting more and more air under our feet. Just imagining this steep wall, passages like up to 65 or 70 degrees with like a small cliff band sort of in the crux section at the top. And eventually we pull out of the upper cliff band onto the kind of like the upper face, which is sort of a convex face. So if you're a skier, you know that sometimes convex features can be a bit more dangerous because there's sort of tension in the snow over the curvature of that. And so we eventually get up there, and we've been checking stability along the way. We get up and we all go up to the summit together, and it's a perfect windless day, the kind of day that sort of makes life around Resurrection Bay feel really special. And so yeah, we decided to drop in, and there are really only about enough snow for 3 people on the line that we came up. And so we have a party of 4. It's myself, Michael Burmeister, Ben Reiniger, and Ryan Hokinson. And Ryan Hokinson decides to go down a line based on a photo that he had took dropping in. So he drops first and heads down this kind of super hyper exposed upper snowfield, and you just see the snow billowing away, sloughing down this enormously cliffed face. And then I head down second on our line of ascent, and this convex face is rolling away beneath you, and so you really can't see exactly what's coming up next. You can feel the exposure growing as the turns are getting steeper and steeper as we approach the kind of cliff crux. And so I get down there, and I'm trying to leave as much snow as possible, so I'm like sidestepping a little bit, and then there's essentially a short leap that you have to do to be able to drop onto this approximately 200 square foot snowfield that's on top of like a 200-foot cliff that's above a bunch of other cliffs. And so it's just a really cool, wild play, sort of a rarefied experience. And we get down there, and then our team was 2 skiers and 2 split boarders. And if you ever ride in a split team, you'll know that people use different strategies for different sections, and like it can change your day whether you're on toe edge or on heel edge on particular features and stuff like that. And so, but eventually everybody got through their personal cruxes, and we came together at the bottom of like the crux, and all took turns riding down this gorgeous snow arete, and everyone safely arrived back at the sleds or back at our skin track, and we all went back to town and felt profoundly changed. And so I've been able to kind of fall in love with that, skiing through that. And here's a poem I wrote about the experience I wanted to share with you guys. It kind of shares a little bit about what it's like to live and be a skier in Seward. Beauty in monochrome, rising from ocean. December rains on the harsh north wind. Black spikes of spruce and hemlock contrast glittering crystalline cathedrals, cyclically hammered by multiple lows, braced by impossible highs. Maritime snowfalls adhere to escarpments, spines, and ribs, sheer mass driven by unrelenting winds. It spackles the land, shattering trees and shutting down power. Hydrogen and oxygen moderate the acute, softening hard lines with a divine brush, creating dreamlike features that defy the dreamer again and again. So when the winds howl and your dreams appear impossible, be patient and learn the moods of the land. Seek soft snow and stability, the warmth of the home fire. Eventually, endless days in the glades give passage to the alpine. Project poised and ready, the paintbrush dry, dream possible, but only for a flash. A whisper jewel glows, calling the dreamer. The time is now, the moment is right. 2-stroke fumes, ski to the base, where are my binoculars? Opportunity knocks, light a fire under nearby dreamers, call them into the dream for its realization overnight. May it be neither a nightmare nor a violent flight, no structureless snow, body hovering in space, spinning, no clinging hard slab atop the cliffs. The dreaming void screams its siren song. Mass attracts mass. Gravity and exposure countered by experience, a pounding heart, a lung sigh, a paramount desire for life. The endlessness of the now is a flow that yields survival. In the heart of space, skis slash through airborne glitter, a 7-year project first try. Did we rob a bank, escape from some forgotten jail to find our true nature? I don't know for sure, but it feels like we got away with something. I love you echoes into the void, dark feelings and thoughts closely thereafter. The mountains are cold, unforgiving, raw, serene, and violent in turn, fatal even, but so is life. But our hearts are warm, we are together, and hot cocoa seems to help things feel better. Another day dawns, spring a rush of busy growth, summer a barrage, fall a quiet garden. And soon enough, the silent, savage winter will cover our world anew. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven. Raven rather nonchalantly talked about skiing down the west face of Mount Alice, but next time you're in Seward, take a look at that peak, and it is outrageous. And what he was able to accomplish and his team to have the skills and the guts and the conditions to pull that off is really remarkable. Most people, when they say they're going to go hike Mount Alice, they go up to a little overlook of the Godwin Glacier and say they hiked Mount Alice. And a few people go to the summit and then will tell you it scared the shit out of them afterwards. But nobody has been able to ski it, so that's really something else. Okay, our final speaker tonight needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyways. Our final speaker is Art Davidson. In the winter of 1967, Art Davidson climbed Denali in winter with Dave Johnston and Ray Janae, and later wrote the classic -148, first winter ascent of Mount McKinley, about their experience. Since then, he helped create Chugach State Park and helped protect other wild areas in Alaska. He has also worked with indigenous people, both in Alaska and elsewhere, writing the book Endangered Peoples About Their Struggles to Survive. When Russia invaded Ukraine, he co-founded Assist Ukraine, which provides tactical medical supplies, surveillance drones, rescue vehicles, and other life-saving supplies to people on the front lines. He is the owner/CEO of the Best Storage Companies and lives in the mountains near Anchorage with his wife Anna and their 3 children. Art Davidson.
I'm going to see if I can hold this thing. Isn't this a wonderful night? I mean, my gosh, I've enjoyed every single one of these stories and seeing all of you here. You know, sometimes when I'm around people who climb or ski mountains, I'm sometimes asked, well, what's changed from the time I was climbing in the 60s and 70s to today? Well, one thing is this right here. You can get a weather report. If we'd known what the weather was going to do on Denali in winter, we wouldn't have gone up, and I wouldn't be here tonight. The other thing is there are so many women, and all of you here, and some of we've heard from, who are out there skiing and kayaking and climbing. And you know, when I came up when I was 20 years old, and I couldn't find any young woman to just go backpacking or, you know, backcountry skiing. And I finally found a woman that loved the outdoors like I did. And she actually, you know, I was very fascinated by her talking about the all-women's race and dozens and dozens and hundreds of women doing it. My first wife, Mossy, she ran the race in 1966, and she was the only woman in the race. So I just have to tell you, it's just a joy for me to see how things have changed, and whether Title IX or just the changing of the times, I don't know how it's happened, but it's just wonderful to see so many women, young women, older women getting out there. So anyway, you alluded to the scent of bashful. I have to embarrass myself since he mentioned that. You know, in those days, back in the 60s, if you're going to go climbing in the Chugach, you almost always made a first ascent because mountains just hadn't been climbed. But I climbed Denali the first time with the Osaka Alpine Club, and this young fellow, Hisazumi, he was going to go back to Japan and would never have a chance to, you know, make a first ascent. So I thought, well, I'll take him out, and we're going to go, well, Mount Baleful. It hadn't been climbed. We'll go climb Mount Baleful. So I get the maps, and I kind of tape them together, and there's all these squiggly lines, and we go out there, and we climb the mountain. And we're just right up there on the summit ridge, and I'm saying, Hisazumi, you go ahead, you go first. Oh, no, please, you go ahead. I wanted him to have that feeling of be the first to step on the top of the mountain. Well, we got to the very top, and guess what? There was a cairn there. Oh, my God. Hey, what's up with this? So what's up with this? And there's in those days, the little registry would sometimes be in those little Kodak film cans. I don't know if you ever remember those. A long time ago. And here there was some of my friends like Paul Cruz and Rod Wilson. They'd climbed it. It was Mount Bashful. I was on the wrong mountain. I'd read the map wrong. Some great explorer I am. So another question I get sometimes is, I mean, why in the hell would you want to go climb Denali in the wintertime, you know? Well, it's a good question. But I'll tell you how it happened. My first friend in Alaska was Shiro Nishimai, a Japanese climber who was getting his master's degree at, it was then Alaska Methodist University, where I knew Bob Spur, and I'm so glad to be able to visit with this young man who knew him so well, and he was a friend of mine. Well, Shiro invited me to climb Denali in the summertime with the Osaka Alpine Club. And we went up there, and we're looking at these huge cornices on the ridges. And we think, my God, imagine the storms and the winds that pack those huge cornices in place. And we wondered, how cold is it going to get in the wintertime? What are the storms going to be like? You know, how cold is it going to get? How hard is the wind going to blow? I mean, you know, how could you even climb in those short hours of daylight? So we were fascinated by this. And to us, it was like, the idea was like, you know, going to an unexplored land, you know, the heart of winter on Denali. That's what it was. So we were really excited about it, and then we found out it was very hard to find anybody who wanted to go with us. You know, it was absolutely no competition to be the first to do this in the wintertime. We we talked to people who climbed Denali before, some really experienced climbers. Oh, my guys, you're not going to make it, and you'll be lucky if you come back, and for sure you'll be frostbitten. But somehow we got together a nice party of 8 of us, and we went up there. Now, you know, sometimes we say sometimes you're afraid of the unknown, right? Well, it's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? Because how can you be afraid of something you don't know about? So we'd prepared for everything that we knew could be a danger. We had specially made parkas, sleeping bags, our food. We counted the calories. We had all kinds of things. We were ready to build igloos and all of that. We get on the glacier, and we set a trail going up the Kahiltna. But you know, the whole surface of the glacier was just like walking on a meadow. Like you'd sink only in 2 or 3 inches in the snow. It was smooth. Shiro and I had been up there in the summertime. Dave Johnson had climbed up the Kahiltna. So we knew the glacier, but there just weren't any crevasses. The second day out, our friend Farine, who'd been a strong, powerful climber, he climbed with Lionel Touray on the first descent of Huntington, and he wandered off our established trail because it looked so safe, and he fell through. And we went to the hole, we pulled him up, and he was lifeless. And I just remember, you know, it's like, you know, just pressing my mouth to his and just breathing and trying to get the oxygen, the air into his lungs. And Dave and George Wickman, who's a doctor, that was pumping his chest, and we just could not revive him. And it just, you know, we were in shock. And each of us dealt with his death differently. Greg Blomberg, our leader, who had been so enthusiastic and done so much to get our equipment and everything ready, he lost heart in the climb. He said, guys, this isn't why I climb. We can come back another time. You know, Shiro said, he knew Shiro loved Alaska, he loved Denali. He knew this would be his only time, and he said, I'd like to go on. Ray Genet said, you know, look, death happens. I've been on crews and construction. Somebody dies. You keep going. So we each responded in different ways, and we decided to go on. Finally, I remember, I think it was at Windy Corner at about 12,000 feet. Finally, it was getting cold. See, we landed there, and it was like 20 degrees, and then it got to be 0 as we started going up. Finally, at Windy Corner, it was 42 below 0, and we were all whooping. This is what we'd come for, you know. So anyway, we kept going up and acclimatizing as we went, and something that I didn't include in the book, but just a personal memory I'll share with you. We were going up from the 14,000 to, you go up a sort of a steep slope and along a ridge from 16,000 something to 17,200, and that's a common sort of high camp. And along that ridge, it's very easy climbing, and there's no real danger of falling. So I said, guys, there's going to be a full moon, and let me just stay here, and I'll catch up with you in the morning. So they went on, and I'm there huddled in my sleeping bag and my super parka and wind pants and everything. It was the most magical thing. The full moon was rising, and you'd see the moonlight hit high on a peak, and then the moonlight would just come down a couloir, and it would go down to the base, and places that were in shadow would be in light, and then the places in light would go back to shadow. And it was just like the whole range was just breathing through that light. And I realized, you know, no one had ever been up here to experience this before. I mean, you kind of have to be up there in the wintertime and have a clear night and the night of the full moon, but it was just magical. And for me, I never raced mountains. I was never a mountain runner. I would have been very slow because I'd like to stop and pick blueberries or watch the moon. But you know, we got ready to go up to the summit, and then we ran into another thing that was the unknown, something we didn't expect. 3 of us, Ray Genet, Dave Johnston, and I, we had a day with a little bit of wind, but it wasn't too bad. We set out, and you know, we'd all climbed this high before. David climbed Denali. I'd climbed the volcanoes in Mexico, and Ray Genet had climbed pretty high too. But we were so slow. It was every step, and then 10 breaths, another step, and about 8 or 9, 10 breaths. What we didn't realize until later, after we got off the mountain, is that particularly in the wintertime, at a northern latitude or a southern latitude, the air at a certain elevation will have less oxygen in a way far north like this. And in the wintertime, when it's cold and the atmosphere descends a little bit. So when we reached the summit, 20,000 feet, 200, I think, we're actually, the oxygen equivalent would have been about 22,300 feet in the Himalayas. So we were more exhausted than we'd expected to be. And it was 57 below zero on the summit. Way in the distance, we could see the little lights of Anchorage. And, I was a little anxious to get going. And we started down, and I was sort of taking the lead. Dave Johnston was behind. And we were just following the little niches that our crampons had made in the snow and ice as we came up. And for the first part of the way, the south face was on our left. It was a black night. There was no moon. There was no moon had risen this night. And we just had this little pool of light, just a little circle of light from our headlamps. And every once in a while, I'd lose the track. And I'd call back to Dave, and then he'd stay there, and I'd fan out, and we'd come on down. We got, and we were so tired. My legs were buckling under me, just climbing down. And I was in good shape in those days. And but we got to Denali Pass, and then we had a decision to make. The weather was fine. We could see the stars. There was no wind. And Dave was saying, well, come on, let's just go on down. Well, some of you have probably been on Denali, and if you've been on the West Buttress, from Denali Pass, there's a reasonably steep slope down to a little basin at about 17,000, 17,002. People have slipped there and died in the summertime. So here we are, it's dark, we're really, really, really tired. And I say, Dave, look, we've cached our sleeping bags here, we've got a tarp to put over us, we've got our stove, we've got a little bit of food we left there on the way up. Let's just spend the night. And he said, no, let's go down. I said, I prevailed, and we decided to wait and rest, be stronger, and go down in the daylight. But with daylight came the wind, and it was just like nothing we'd ever experienced. And we just huddled there at first, and then finally we just knew we had to get out of it, and Dave began to chip away at the snow and ice, and frost biting his hand, freezing part of his hands when he was doing it. So we got this little tiny cave that we all kind of squeezed into. And we figured, how long can a wind like this blow? 5 hours, 1 day. We'll just hang out here and we'll go down tomorrow. What we didn't know is our friends had tried to come up from the basin below, and as they approached Denali Pass, the wind, they could not go into the wind. It was just too ferocious. It was a massive storm that, again, we had no idea was coming, no weather reports. And as it came through the range, it was funneling through the North Peak and the South Peak on Denali, and we were absolutely in the worst place. And so we were pinned down, and we went under the ice, and we started rationing our little bit of food, our little bit of fuel to make, just to melt some snow and ice. And meanwhile, our friends down below, they're just getting more and more anxious. 1 day passes, 2 days passes. On the third day, they can't be alive anymore. And they had their own kind of agony after losing Farine. Here they are. They've just seen us disappear up there. They can't come up. They can't get to the pass. And they just knew there was no way we could be alive. So they started going down the mountain. And, of course, we didn't know that. And we just hoped that the wind would stop. And we were sort of in a state somewhere between consciousness and sleep. We never slept soundly. We're always sort of restless in our sleep. And we were awake, we're sort of dizzy. And between the three of us, we had maybe a combination of one functioning brain. At different times, one or the other of us would be impulsive. Let's make a break for it. Janae would say, I'm going down. Or Ray would say that. And then I even said that once. But we kept holding together and staying together, feeling that we're going to be stronger together. Finally, I think it was the seventh day, we woke up, and it was silent. Because you see that wind had just been pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding on the roof of our cave. It was only about that deep. And the cave was so small that the three of us could not lay flat on our backs. One of us always had to be on our side. When we turned on our side, our upper shoulder would hit the top of the cave and little ice crystals would filter down. We were so anxious to get out of that cave. And when the wind stopped, we went out, and then it was a thick, thick, thick whiteout. We literally couldn't see a rock or one of ourselves 10, 12 feet away. So now what are we going to do? We're emaciated. It took us a long time to even be able to just stand up. You know, we're sort of reeling over and leaning on each other. And now we're so incredibly weak. How are we going to go down that steep ice slope? And we're thinking, where are our friends? Where are our guys? We didn't know that they'd left us for dead, knowing that there was no way we could be alive. And it was like suicide to go down now in a complete whiteout. You get that basin, I mean, the mountain just kind of fans out, and if you don't hit the camp and then the ridge, you just wander on down this glacier, and then you never have the strength to come back up. But it was like suicide to crawl back into that cave. And I remember thinking, there's a little piece of tarp above the, poking out of the ice. And I just attacked it, thinking maybe there's something under there. And I beat at it with my ice axe, and it was so cold, and the metal was cold, and the ice axe, the metal on it broke, and I kept whacking at it. And I'd just be exhausted. I was like a frenzied kind of animal, sort of. And finally I got down, and we found some food. And we were able to eat that night. In the morning, we felt stronger, and we began going down. It was a clear day, and we got down to the 17,000 foot level, and here was a jet plane flying around the mountain. I said, that's weird. I wonder why they're flying around the mountain, Another big plane comes flying around, boom. What's all this? I mean, they're out here doing exercises. I mean, it didn't dawn on us that people were looking for us. So our minds were so deadened. Here's another example of it. We saw a plane we recognized. It was Don Sheldon's Cessna 180. Any of you remember Don Sheldon? Great guy, wasn't he? So he was so wonderful guy. So he was flying up, as he would say, to check on my boys. And he came up and he circled, and we saw him drop something. And I thought, oh my God, I bet it's cheeseburgers, So I run over to get it, and by run I mean like like this. And I reached down, and it's this kind of black box, and I said, I mean, how am I going to open this and get the cheeseburgers, I come back to, and I say, Dave, Ray, what the heck is this thing? And we're like, we stare at it, like imagine three apes looking at something. What is this thing? Finally, I think it was Ray that says, Art, I think it's a radio. Oh my God. Well, anyway, we were able to come down, and I think I've already gone over my 7 minutes. I know anybody that knows me, and somebody here knew that I get carried away talking. They put me last, so I wouldn't usurp any time here. But I just want to share a couple of things that stayed with me after the climb. When I wrote -148, there was this line from Saint-Exupéry, who'd written The Little Prince and Night Flight. He said, that new vision of the world won through hardship. And so I said that I think that if only for a moment each of us had experienced that new vision of the world won through hardship. And now, many years later, 50, 55, some years later, I realized I didn't get that quite right. It wasn't just a momentary sort of vision of it, at least in me, and I know our climb affected Ray and Dave hugely too, but for me, it was like embedded in me. And what I had done for challenge and finding hardship in the mountains in a survival situation, I found myself gravitated towards wild areas and creatures that were, and threatened with disappearing, just as we'd almost disappeared in the wind. And to working with people that were, they didn't seek hardship, they were just born to hardship. I began working with Native people on some of their issues, and with the Yupik people in particular. And I'm very happy my wife Anna's here tonight, who's Yupik. And so I think it affected me to just, live my life differently. There's a book I read after the climb by Viktor Frankl. Maybe some of you know it, Man's Search for Meaning. And in it he says his idea of, and some of his therapy is he will encourage people, live as if you've died. And now you've got a chance to come back and do it, the way you really want to. Whatever that is. In other words, don't take it for granted. You've got this one life. You are going to die. Intellectually, we all know we're going to die, right? Every one of us, But in the time span of when I climbed Denali in the winter and now, that 50-some years, most of you are going to be the memories of your children and grandchildren. So I think it embedded in me this feeling of trying to use the moment and trying to use my time as best as I could, whatever little abilities I have. I'm not, and so that's why when, I know there's a direct link in my own personal life that when war broke out in Ukraine, my heart went out to those people because I'd been in a survival situation. And I don't know, did some of you remember the defense of Mariupol? And there's a movie about it. I don't know if any of you saw it, but the Aschoff Brigade, they were trapped underground in the Azovstal steel plant, and there were nuclear bunkers down there. The Russians couldn't get to them, but they kept pounding and pounding and pounding where they were, just like the wind had pounded us. And they were under there 90 days. And I really identified with that. And it was excruciating because it reminded me so much of being under the ice on Denali in wintertime. Our friends couldn't get to us just as the other Ukrainians couldn't get to those guys. And so later, I'll skip through a lot of time. We, with Assist Ukraine, we get a lot of tactical medical supplies, vehicles, drones, so forth, all things that save lives. And it turns out that the leader of those people, taken prisoner by Russia, but then through a prisoner exchange, he was able to come back to Ukraine, lead his group again. And because of my experience on Denali, I knew his group, his men, were going into a really, really tough winter on the front lines. And I know, if you've been in this kind of situation that, just a broken arm, a leg, a wound, losing some blood, if it's below zero, you can die. It can be fatal. So we sent him a whole bunch of these chemical blankets, you pop it open and there's a chemical reaction. And Propenko, the leader, was so taken aback by that because those kind of things aren't thought of in these big exchanges of lots of money and all the aid and everything else. So I think, just to wrap it up, I know my life was changed by our experience and coming so close to dying. I wouldn't wish coming so close on anybody, but at the same time, I know it changed my life and just made me feel that every day is precious. And I found a time in life with having children with my wife, Anna, I would become a soccer coach. And I was happy to see Jim Drake and his wife here. I coached their son once. Whatever it is, do it. Do it. I mean, that's what I brought back from Denali in winter. Try to love the people you love. Don't put off saying how much you care about somebody. Reach out where you can. And so I'm happy to share those memories with you. Thanks very much.